Good afternoon, everyone. I am Braz. I'm a coach here at Agile Velocity. I have the great opportunity today to work with one of our other coaches here, Brian O'Fallon. This is us. These are lovely pictures, but you can actually see us moving in video, in actual live color. I mentioned that I'm a coach here at Agile Velocity. And in addition to that, when I'm not being a coach, as you note there on the screen, I've actually got 3 dogs and 6 kids. Brian, you want to give anybody information about you other than the fact that you've got 2 dogs, 3 kids, and a little catching up to do?
Yeah, I feel a little bit behind, Braz. Good morning, everyone from Seattle. It's still morning here, so can't pull the East Coast afternoon thing, Braz. I just also wanted to throw in, just for context, I'm also an organizational coach, Agile coach here at Agile Velocity. And I've been doing this Agile thing for about 10 years. It was almost exactly 10 years ago when my company decided that we were going to do Scrum, and I got the opportunity to be the pilot team. I was a project manager and got sent off for 2 days of training and magically was a Scrum Master. And it's that transition that made me interested in what these transitions are like for other people as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. Similarly, I've been doing this for about a decade too, and I came in from a different perspective. I was the manager of a group of developers, and we had, as you'll see some pictures later, some developers who were a bit of a cowboys, developers who were lacking some sort of real goal and way to start managing their work. So similarly, I went off and got anointed with my CSM and introduced Scrum to my organization too. And I've been doing it for about full time as a full-time coach for 5 years now, as an Agilist over 10. So it's interesting that we talk about, roles in Agile. And one of the things we're curious about, and we're going to do a poll here for a second for everybody who's on. It's interesting to understand where people are coming from. So one of the things we want to know is where are you coming from today? What's your role today? Either an Agile role, which we've listed on there, or some of the roles that are, not traditional Agile roles, but we're just kind of getting a feel for who's out there and where you're coming from. So take a second, go ahead and answer the poll that just popped up if you can see it. And we'll just take a few seconds here to see how many people go ahead and come in. And JT, when you've got a good number, go ahead and let's see what the results look like.
It's interesting, of course, because when people are entering into these transformation efforts, sometimes they already have the Agile role. They're though sometimes being told that they are a hybrid, or that they are a Scrum Master, but they still have project manager duties. So just pick the one that resonates most with you.
Yeah. So this doesn't surprise me. We've got a good number of Scrum Masters. Hi, everybody. And obviously, here's some people near and dear to your heart, Brian, a good number of project managers.
Excellent.
Out in the audience today. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to do that. With our technical webinar series, if you've been to any of these before, one of the things you'll notice is we don't want to go really in depth into training and talking, but we do want to just real quickly touch on those 3 roles. And we'll use Scrum as an example of, the different roles you'll see as your organization start to adopt Agile. Now, we assume at this point, everybody's done some level of Scrum training and are familiar with the 3 roles in Agile: product owner, Scrum Master, and team member. So real quickly, let's talk about that first role there, the product owner. The product owner is that one person on your team who is responsible for that thing called the product backlog. They take the time to really understand who your customer is and what they really want from you and your team, hopefully in the form of the product you're building today, but if not, the product you're going to be building next. And on top of that, also in being focused externally to the customer, also focused internally to your stakeholders, helping them understand the needs that are within the organization and communicating and managing expectations with those stakeholders. And then with those 2 big pieces of information, customer needs expressed in your backlog and stakeholder needs expressed in your backlog, they really work with their team to coordinate how the product's going to get built and how it gets released. It works with the team to coordinate those releases. That's your product owner. Brian, you want to talk real quickly about the idea of a team member?
Absolutely. Now, this is one that I think sometimes gets glossed over a little bit when we talk about role transitions.
Mhm.
The team member, remember from your trainings, we're talking about everybody required to execute on that vision that the product owner has laid out. So we include in here all the engineers, development and quality assurance engineers, and as well as anyone else that the team uses to help execute. So, designers, UX folks, depending on what your product is, it could include database people as well. But it's a different kind of work, isn't it? We were talking about collaborating with the product owner to understand the vision and collaborating as a team to execute against it.
Yeah.
So let's just leave it at that and transition now, Braz, back to you for Scrum Masters.
Sure. And this is one I think, Brian, you and I both had that first initial hurdle to transition to, is that role of the Scrum Master. That's near and dear, I think, to both of our hearts. That Scrum Master is one of those roles that is frequently misunderstood or not well understood in most organizations making that transition to Scrum especially. But the similar roles in other Agile frameworks, things like coach and when you're doing XP or doing some other framework. That Scrum Master is the person who steps out of the development team and isn't really responsible for rolling up their sleeves and delivering code and delivering product, but really starts to become that helper, helps the product owner, isn't responsible for the product backlog, but helps make sure it's actually maintained and ready to go. They don't actually roll up their sleeves and help the team make the commitments, but they help make sure the commitments are being made and are being kept, and raises up those impediments and helps bring that visibility, not just in your progress towards your goal, but also what's going on to prevent you from getting to your goals. And then most importantly, for organizations first adopting Agile and Scrum, they become that first real trainer and mentor. They become the master of Scrum in the case of Scrum, where this is where the word comes from, of showing everyone this is how we interact differently as a team, and then outside the team as an organization now starts to understand what that really means to be Agile and to be a Scrum organization. So with these three roles, I think the next question we want to ask you guys, we started talking about some of these transitions that go through here. We're going to ask you another poll. As you guys are starting to adopt Agile and Scrum, what role transition is your organization having the most difficulty supporting or having the most difficulty with? So as we sit here and look at the poll that we have, your organization's having the trouble with the transition to which of these roles? Which of these is the one that really is starting to feel a difficult shift? And so again,
and if you are in one of these transitions, the transition destination that you're most interested in as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it may just very well be that I'm perfectly comfortable in my transition, but I'm trying to help my organization with these people in these roles where we don't know where they go yet. We don't understand how they fit into this new way of working.
Right.
So, and JT, when we've got a good number of people who've weighed in, let's go ahead and see the results when you have a sec.
All right, it looks like we've almost got about half, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay. Yeah, the good old manager.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's some interesting things there. I'm glad we'll definitely talk about that one as well. Yeah, so let's if we don't mind, let's go ahead and start talking through what some of those role transitions are.
Absolutely. So let's start off with my favorite because it's the one I experienced, the project manager to Scrum Master. I do note from our first poll about where people are coming from, there was a lot of people in the project management role, but interestingly, not so many people concerned about the transition to the Scrum Master role. So that's good news. I'll just tell my story. I was a project manager, a good PMI, PMP kind of guy, and management just saw parallel. They said, well, you're doing sort of project oversight. Feels like the Scrum Master is doing the same thing, not setting the vision, not executing against it, but helping guide the team towards completion. Seems sort of similar. Let's dig in. And from my experience, both personal experience, and also now having been a coach and helping organizations do this for 5 years, there's a couple buckets. Sometimes these project managers who were successful as a project manager and really felt like they were adding value by coming up with these detailed plans and managing towards those plans, they found becoming a Scrum Master a little uncomfortable. Like some of the things that they had really taken comfort in and were valued by the organization now just weren't valued. So they found the Scrum Master role to be a little adrift and crazy making. There were other project managers like myself who enjoyed the interpersonal and the process and trying to figure out how to improve these processes. They found it to be a great fit and really freeing to let go of some of that other stuff. So let's, I guess let's leave that there. And Braz, talk a little bit maybe about your transition.
Sure. And this is one of the 2 transitions I made, and I think this is a common one we see. I know, especially early in my career adopting Scrum, I also started adopting the role of being a manager and came from the point of being an expert. The idea of being that superhero that when things got bad, I was the person that they called was incredibly rewarding. And we bring in this thing called Scrum, we bring in these things called self-organized and collaborative teams. And all of a sudden, that need and that opportunity to really be that constant superhero, or even that direction to be able to say, I work on what I want to, but it's fun. I'm out here in the Wild West, and the stuff that's interesting or the stuff that's loud or the stuff that's fun and exciting is the thing I'm going to work on. That starts to go away in service to really a coordinated effort as a team to start delivering on value. But even during this transition from really superhero or cowboy to team member, you're an engineer and you're still an engineer. What usually happens, to steal Brian's phrase that I love, is while your role doesn't change, the work changes around you, and the dynamic for how that work gets done and how you define your success starts to change. The work changes from, I'm going to close myself in and solve this problem and be that superhero, to I now have to work with my peers and take on a different role within the team of mentoring and helping and raising up skills. And I have to now learn how to collaborate. I now have to learn to communicate more effectively. And success goes from, look at me, I was awesome and I solved this problem, to we solved this problem. And in the process, as one of those technical leaders, I helped my team members grow as well. So this role transition is everything you had before and a lot of new stuff that would be really hard to transition to. So similar to you, Brian, I think, unless you want to add anything, I'm going to let that sit there for a minute.
No, I think that's a good overview.
So you want to talk a bit about BAs and PMs?
Absolutely. The need for a product owner is really emphasized in all of the various Scrum trainings that you've all had and that I certainly had. But where this product owner is supposed to come from is a little less clear. I've been in organizations personally and as a coach, helping organizations where the folks who are making personnel decisions say, business analysts, they're out there writing up specs, and these stories really feel like tiny specks. Let's just go ahead and have our business analysts become product owners. And this is the what usually happens moment. What usually happens is that these BAs are great at writing stories. I remember fondly a BA that I was very close to who pushed the team to develop 6 months worth of stories.
That's
really
awesome.
Yeah. And then the project got canceled.
Right.
And that 6 months worth of work was flushed down the drain. But the other part of being a product owner is not only are you describing the work in writing, but you're also setting the vision. And part of setting the vision is making choices. And the BAs are rarely I'll go out on a limb and say I've never seen a BA to product owner transition where the BA was deputized with enough authority to actually make product decisions.
Mhm.
It usually means the product manager is lurking in the background and forcing the decisions to flow through them. So the other obvious thing to try, which many organizations do, and I think we recommend, is to make the product managers for a particular product, make them the product owners. But again, and what usually happens, we see it over and over again, is that this is an add onto their list of duties. And so they still have all the other stuff they were doing, be that many products or other involvement in marketing and product discovery, that they don't have time to devote to really being a full-fledged product owner, working with the team, having all those great conversations, and writing up all those stories and holding the refinement sessions. And so you end up with a product manager to product owner transition where the individual in it feels overtaxed and doesn't really feel like they're doing a good job in either role.
Yeah, and Brian, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of similarities between an organization's ability to misestimate the amount of time it requires to be a good Scrum Master and have a similar misestimation of how much time it really takes to be a good product owner.
Right.
Now, I think that's a hard organizational shift that we don't do a great job of talking about in some of those transitions.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Braz, one of the other role transitions that really showed up in our poll was what happens to our dev managers.
Yeah. And again, that's another one that's near and dear to my heart. You know, this is when the first organization that I really started to adopt Scrum with. I was a development manager who had been promoted from being that technical expert. And I suddenly found myself going from the world of being able to be that source of decisioning around what needs to be done next and ordering all the priorities coming into our development team and making real calls, not just on what, but a lot of times how things should be done, to now being thrust into a world with my team saying, hold on there, buddy, that's our job. Stay out of our stuff here. And if we're an empowered team, why are you telling us what to do? And there's a hard transition there as a manager to say, wait a minute, maybe I should be an actual manager in the traditional sense of the world, where it turns me less from taskmaster and less from time clock keeper and less from positional authority into someone who's doing the work of real coaching and mentoring and taking the people who report to me and setting out the ideas for what they should be doing to help their own career growth. And being that source of knowledge and expertise to say, let me offer you some mentorship into ways we could do things better. And while you're learning from me, I'm going to learn from you too. Now, one of the hard shifts is if you really are a technical expert, you may actually miss that hands-on technical work of being a senior technical lead or an architect. And
yeah, if you really enjoy that, it's really hard to give it up.
It is. And in those cases where you may not, that shift from development manager to servant leader may not be a great shift. You may go back to being, you know what, I'd much rather be back on the team writing code. I'd much rather be back on the team being a part of the team and not standing back from the team and taking on more of a servant leadership role. So that's also an option when you start looking at that shift from development manager to something else.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add, Brian?
Oh, just that I've seen people make very happy transitions in both directions.
Yeah.
That I didn't really ever enjoy holding all these one-on-ones. I didn't really enjoy writing people's performance reviews. And I get to go back and just be a technical expert. Hallelujah.
Right. Sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I have seen a sort of emotional barrier to giving up that manager title. And I think this is a time just to emphasize in all of these different transitions, when Braz and I are working with organizations, we really emphasize being empathetic, that we are dealing with people who are in roles and have created a certain amount of expertise and skill and, let's be honest, prestige, power, and money associated with particular titles. And going in and shaking these titles up can be really challenging in bread and butter kind of ways. So we really emphasize, let's be empathetic. Let's understand what is going on for the people in these transitions and really try and support them and find a good fit for everybody.
Yeah.
There isn't something formulaic.
No, and yes, and Brian, I think one of the things that really resonates with me, and I love the way you say this, is what usually happens. One of the things to keep in mind is, there are some patterns we see where things usually happen. But one of the beauties of this opportunity to do some of these transitions is there's no one right answer. And if I am a technical expert who's been promoted to a manager and I'm not really happy or succeeding the way I want to be, I don't find the joy out of that I used to find, there's an opportunity here to transition into a role in an agile team that is very different. And it may be really useful for us to take advantage of that, to really say, what do you want to do and what brings you joy into your work every day? So, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, we don't often enough ask those questions
really
in our workplaces. Yeah. What do you enjoy? Where do your skills and your aptitudes and your growth plans align? So that's some of the stuff that we really look at when we work with an organization. Let's just make it a good, happy transition for everybody involved.
Yeah. And so one of the things we do in these webinars is we go ahead and look at some of the questions that have come in through our CSM and CSPO courses. And I want to tee up a few of those. And Brian, I'm going to go ahead and tee this first one up to you. The product manager versus a product owner. What's the difference between a product manager and a product owner anyway?
Great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. And as you said, this is something that comes up fairly commonly in our trainings. People leave us with questions and they are potentially a product manager and they're like, what's the difference? It seems so similar. The real similarity, of course, is the product manager and now product owner is really responsible for understanding their product, setting its vision, getting large organizational buy-in and alignment around that vision. But with the product owner role, you're really extending that down into the execution side, having those conversations with the team, getting their feedback, getting their buy-in. I'm amazed at how many times fantastic product ideas come from your development team because they're mucking around with it every day and they know what the support tickets are saying and what their customers want to see. And prior to this product owner role, there oftentimes wasn't a mechanism to give that information back. I also just wanted to throw out there that in our question section, we have a question about, do we need a business analyst in product development teams when there already are product owners and managers? And I'm just going to throw out that you don't necessarily need a BA. You don't, but it's one of those things that sometimes a product owner who's finding that they don't have enough time to fully embrace the role and live it can leverage some of the expertise of a business analyst to help dig in and understand and write up stories. What's important is not that the product owner do it all themselves. It's that the product owner is responsible for making sure that it happens. And if you make it happen through extensive collaboration with your dev team, or by leveraging another role like a business analyst, right. That's fine. And you just have to make sure it occurred.
Yeah, and to Brian, you're going off road a little bit for going to the questions a little early, and that's okay. This is a great reminder for everybody on the call that if they have questions, please feel free to go ahead and use our Q&A function here within Zoom to start asking questions. I want to yes and what you just said about the role of the BA on the team. It's interesting when we talked about that transition, earlier from BA to product owner or from product manager to product owner, that there are two very distinct skill sets that we're expecting our product owner to have. We're expecting them to have that customer focused vision and the opportunity to be able to have those in-depth conversations around what customers want and long-term planning. In addition, we expect them to have that level of expertise and availability to their development team so that when things come up, they're not going to be waiting for an answer. They have that immediate expertise available to them. And
Right.
we'll talk about, here's a preview, we'll talk about in a second, the idea of combining roles. But this is also a place where you may actually have all the responsibilities of one role split across multiple people. And the role of the product owner may be handled by the forward-facing product manager and the internal-facing business analyst who work really closely together in concert. But until one of them, or maybe one of them never does, get up the skills of both roles and both parts of that one product owner role, you may have to split that across two people. Just be very cognizant of the fact that you're doing it and look for opportunity to say, now my product owner really is fully T-shaped. There's that T-shaped people we all love hear about, and can take on that role by themselves. So another set of questions that come up that we see often when we go through our classes is the idea of combining roles, conveniently enough. And we see this a lot. Can I both be the product owner and the Scrum Master? Can I be the Scrum Master and the manager? Can I be, the Scrum Master and the developer? Well, and this is where I put on my coaching hat for a second and give the answer no one likes. Well, of course you can do anything. But the question is, are you going to be effective? The question is, are you going to be able to really embody that role? And I think this partly comes from, as we mentioned earlier, the misunderstanding around the scope of the role of the product owner, the scope of the role of a Scrum Master, what it really means to be an effective person fulfilling that role completely. And the idea that I can be a Scrum Master and a developer, I can both be separated from the team to watch for impediments and watch for process improvements and be nose down in the code, actually delivering value. That's a very hard thing to be able to do well. The idea that I can both be a product owner and I make those real technical decisions about, here's the things we should be doing, and a Scrum Master to be able to have that external bit of, foresight and knowledge to go, hey, product owner, you're going from what into how, and self-correct myself by putting on two hats is hard. I've had to do it. I think we all have, and we don't always have 100% fulfilled roles. There's a reason I wear hats, and that's because an old habit I used to have of I'm now putting on my Scrum Master hat. Hey guys, this is my very, very real signal to me and everyone else that I'm taking on a different role. And I expect you guys as team members, because we have a great set of working agreements, to call me on it when I step outside the boundaries of that role. So yes, you can do it. We obviously don't recommend it. We've seen it. We've seen it a lot of times. It can be uncomfortable, but in the short time when you're starting to stand up teams, you can do it. Just to recognize that it's not going to go as smoothly as you want it to. Anything you want to add to that, Brian?
Just the time frames we're talking about.
Yeah, good call.
Can the Scrum Master be a developer? This is one that I get asked all the time. And I'm always suspicious based on who's asking it. If it's a developer who wants to be a Scrum Master, that is a very different conversation than if it's a HR leader who's wondering if we can cut down on headcount. Mm-hmm. So if the motivation is to further a passion on a developer who really loves technology and also loves to work on the interpersonal part and teamwork, I'm much more enthusiastic about letting that person explore that side of themselves than I am with someone trying to cut costs. Can a Scrum Master be a developer? Absolutely. I see it on very mature teams where the rhythm and the process of Scrum has become ingrained and the amount of shepherding and conforming to process is pretty minimal. What usually happens in my mind when you do that for cost-cutting purposes, you end up with a person who's being forced to do the Scrum Master role who doesn't really want to, and as a result is not doing a very good job, and additionally is a very expensive, poor Scrum Master.
And the other thing too, Brian, I think there may be a blog post coming out of that is what happens to your Scrum Master when your team no longer needs a dedicated Scrum Master, quote unquote, because they're so mature. I think that's a whole other conversation we could have.
Right.
But, looking at time, I want to make sure we go through, get to these last couple things. Brian, you want to
Okay.
talk for a minute about the idea of some of the missing roles? We talked about combining them, but what if we just don't have somebody to fill the role?
That's a great question, and I'm going to cheat, Braz, and I'm going to answer a question that was posed
Good idea.
by Mr. Walton about rotating. If you don't have a dedicated Scrum Master, you really are well served by having somebody fill the role in. I recommend finding the person who's most interested in it, who's already on the development team, QA, dev, whatever it is. But my big encouragement is to make sure that that person stays in the role for a good long time, that it is a distinct skill set. It is one that improves with practice and requires attention. And Dalen, the idea of rotating the Scrum Master role every few sprints turns out that the transition costs from one Scrum Master to the next usually means that it's a lot of work and you don't get much out of it. I've seen it done. It rarely goes well. If you are going to rotate it, make it a good long time, like quarterly or half a year. Don't do take the stance of this is a pain, let's rotate the pain the same way we do with like on-call prod support and just shift it around every sprint.
Oh, you're giving me bad memories, Brian.
Yeah. It's it usually doesn't go well.
No.
Just really quick, there was also a question, the other half of that question posed on the Q&A board was, could you rotate the product owner role?
Right.
And this is where I'm going to say, please God, no.
Right. Good call.
The product owner role really has to have this long-term vision and deep understanding of where you're going to take the product. And, you might get away with rotating the Scrum Master role quarterly because it's primarily process. And you can come up to speed and implement process without necessarily a tremendous amount of in-depth understanding of the product. The in-depth understanding of the product is so idiosyncratic to the particular product that you are never going to have an effective product owner in the quarter or whatever time rotation you're talking about doing. It just doesn't lead to good results.
Yeah.
One of the biggest losses on a Scrum team that I see is when a product owner leaves. To be honest, a Scrum Master departure, a dev team member departure, these are painful. We really value stable teams and the style and the rhythm that they create amongst each other. But boy, losing a product owner is a huge loss, and it takes a ton of time for the new product owner to ramp up and become effective.
Yeah, that's really true. So I want to cheat a little bit like you did, Brian. And the
Sure.
next question, conveniently, someone's already asked that as well.
Okay.
When we start talking about the idea of skill sets, and Dalen also asked, do you feel that the Scrum Master has to have a technical or development background in order to be effective? So does a Scrum Master have to understand the business side of the things too? No, they don't have to. Of course, it helps. It helps from, and I used to call this my spidey sense as a Scrum Master. When I was a Scrum Master, depending on my technical background, I had a spidey sense when something was wrong. I had a spidey sense to maybe start asking questions around certain things around, hey, it looks like our CI/CD pipeline's a little wonky this week. Hey, have we really thought about refactoring this bit of code because we keep seeing issues with it? Hey, have we really thought about it? So it gave me enough knowledge to ask questions without presuming the answer. And I think that's the danger of having a Scrum Master who has too deep technical knowledge, is they can then move from facilitating and helping the team come up with their own answers to imposing answers.
Mhm.
And I think it's one of those things where enough technical knowledge to have a good spidey sense, whether you come to that through your background as a former developer, or you come through it by working with your team closely and start to get that understanding for things. It's not a requirement. It's a nice to have. Same thing with the business as well. It helps to help you understand, as things move through this system that is our organization, here are the political troubles we're going to have. Here are the process troubles we're going to have. And here are the things that I need to start looking out for, and maybe even anticipating to say, we've seen legal review take far too long on lots of occasions. Is there something going on there that we need to have a conversation about how to change the organization? So hopefully that answers your question. I appreciate that, Dalen. What I'm going to do now is open the floor a bit to everybody's questions. So this time we're actually going to remember to turn off the presentation so you can actually see our smiling faces. Hi, everybody. And we're going to start answering these questions to you guys as we go. So, Brian, do you have one teed up that you want to answer?
Sure. I see one here. Should the dev manager be on a Scrum team?
Oh,
That
good
is
question.
an advisor. And that's something that we encounter all the time. Very common to walk into an organization and find out that we have an HR reporting manager assigned to each team. And it's an interesting hybrid. It feels a little bit like a technical lead, and they're there making setting direction for the team. And also they're writing people's performance reviews and responsible for their professional development. And so we get asked this question, are they on the team or not? The traditional Scrum answer is, hey, there's only 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and dev team. So my first question is this dev manager writing code? If they're writing code, they're on the team. They're a dev member. My second question is, are they writing performance reviews? Because the cornerstone of Scrum is honesty and process improvement. And it is hard to give each other, as adults, straightforward, honest feedback. It's one of the biggest challenges I think there is in Scrum. It is hard to do that with another adult. And it is all the more hard if you've got the guy writing your performance review watching you give or receive this feedback. So we form Scrum teams here at Agile Velocity to accomplish internal work all the time. And if I'm supposed to deliver something to Braz and I don't get to it, I need him to be able to say, Brian, you let me down. I'm not able to complete my work until you give me this. If our boss is watching this interaction, it's going to make me defensive and it's going to make Braz hesitant. It isn't a good fit. So my advice is no, they shouldn't be on the Scrum team. If they want to be a technical contributor, please give up the HR reporting responsibilities and hand it to someone else.
Yeah, that's, I've seen it work too, where I'm a development manager for this team, but I still want to keep my technical chops up to date. I'll go be a team member on this other team that I don't have a direct reporting structure with. That's still difficult because there's still a bit of positional authority from an organizational structure standpoint.
Right.
But at least there's not that immediate concern around my job security and my ability to be open and honest and be transparent.
Yeah, that positional authority reigns large. We see it all the time between dev and QA, senior devs versus junior devs, etc.
Yeah, and similar to that, then another anonymous attendee, thank you for asking your question, asks, is it possible for that development manager to be the Scrum Master? Hopefully the answer should be obvious, at least in our opinion. No, they can't. And again, one of the ways we become successful as Agile teams, using Scrum or not, is the idea that we build safe and open and transparent teams that are self-organizing and really self-managing. And to have someone with positional authority sit on the team and create potentially an unsafe place for me to be, really transparent and improvement focused, and be able to tell, hey, Brian, when you know what, when you were out for 2 days and you didn't let anybody know what was going on and left those 8 files checked out, we stopped. Dude, don't do that anymore. If I can't have that open and honest conversation with you, with my manager sitting on the team, or even as the Scrum Master, that idea of Scrum Master being a servant leader and offering to help, that offer of help very much turns into instead a demand or a requirement or an expectation of performance that takes that empowerment away from the team and takes their ability to feel comfortable saying, we're going to solve this ourselves, and makes it now someone solved it for us. It's a really hard thing to do. And I have not seen a team that does a great job of having a manager on the team in a role. So avoid it if you can.
Yep.
Brian, you something you want to go ahead and tackle from the list?
Sure. There's one that was just posed by Dalen again, which
Thanks,
I think, yeah, thank you. You're keeping us going, Dalen. That I wanted to dig into a little bit. And Braz, let's do this jointly.
Yeah.
It was a question about a career path.
Mm-hmm.
When you are a newly minted product owner or Scrum Master, what does your career path look like? And I think on the product owner side, it's a little more straightforward. I've seen plenty of product managers become product owners, but really stay on the same ladder that they would have been on as product managers.
Yeah.
That maybe, yeah.
So I bristle a little bit or smile a little bit at the idea that that's an easy conversation, because I think the transition from old role to newer role can be fairly easy, and there's some things we can do to really ask some people some centering questions and some really job passion and job excitement questions around helping them find a better new role. But then I think there's another question that when I read this from Dalen saying, great, so I'm a Scrum Master. How do I become a senior Scrum Master or Scrum Master Manager or Director of Scrum Mastering, right?
Yeah.
It is difficult in organizations that are hierarchical in nature to have that career growth. And I think it's a similar struggle we have in the technical excellence, to use an example, that I'm a developer. I'm a really good developer. And at some point, my career path says I shift out of this thing that I'm really good at, writing code, into managing people, which is now an entirely new skill set that I'm completely uncomfortable for. So I think there's that piece that we don't do very well.
I just wanted to throw in on the Scrum Master question there, the career path. I've been asked that at almost every company I've worked with. Usually a few weeks into the coaching, the head of the PMO or a project manager who's become a Scrum Master will take me aside and say, what's my path? Mm-hmm. So I can just share what I've seen. You and Braz kind of hit on some of these. You might become a manager of Scrum Masters. You might take our route and become a teacher or a coach of Scrum Masters or organizations. And Dalen also put in there another possibility is, can you become the Scrum Master at the next level up at the program or portfolio level? Absolutely. But one of the things we have observed when we work with organizations is the old straightforward career ladders don't apply in the same way in a flatter, more team collaborative based organization.
Yeah,
and
I think that really says it really well, Brian, is that when you think of a ladder, you think of stepping up in an organization through layer and layer. And when we introduce these agile aligned frameworks, these agile aligned ways of being to organizations, we flatten out that ladder so there's less progression from a role and position standpoint, and it becomes more around skills and talents than it does. And when we go back to T-shaped people again, it becomes around skill acquisition and utility to the organization, and measuring things like how effective you are at mentoring your peers, and how effective you are on taking on additional training and facilitation responsibilities, and things outside of the I'm a developer on this team. I now have a broader impact horizontally across the organization, not necessarily vertically from position. How does that resonate with you, Brian?
Yeah, that feels about right. Yeah. So, Dalen, I hope we've answered your question on the career path for Scrum Masters and product owners, perhaps. But it seems like a real natural progression to Ann's question about tech leads.
I agree. Yeah. So go ahead, Brian. Let's dive into Ann's question too.
Okay. It's interesting, Ann, that that old way of looking at things of, hey, we have a career progression. You have a junior developer, a more senior developer. You have a team lead or a project lead. That really gets interesting when we do Scrum. The old way of measuring people in terms of their ability to push a project through, help manage the execution. Now we've got the self-organizing team, right? And that skill set is subsumed by the process. So it is hard, Ann, to be blunt. If your question is from the team perspective, how do we equalize them with the dev team? We lean on the Scrum Master to do that. When you have a grooming or refinement session, this is a very common place to see this crop up. The team is supposed to come to this common understanding of what's involved, and you've got one individual, this senior lead, who wants to manage the whole conversation and have the final say so. We really lean on the Scrum Master to intervene and make sure all the voices are heard, make sure that people really are in agreement, and that the decision-making power no longer resides with this tech lead. It can be kind of a tricky one, and the tech lead may feel devalued a little bit. Frankly, the old HR titles, junior dev, full dev, senior dev, tech lead or project lead, those may persist, but they're more descriptive than they are prescriptive of what happens on the team. Right. And I've found that it's really up to the Scrum Master to make sure that happens on the team level. If your career track requires it, that sounds that it's not uncommon. We've got HR structures and patterns that no longer really fit neatly with the way we're working. But we don't want to make that drive our process.
But Brian, it's interesting. I think back to the last two big companies that I helped with some of the struggles they were having with Agile. When you start looking at things like job descriptions and role descriptions for some of these, up the ladder positional changes from, I'm a entry-level Java developer to Java developer 2, 3, 4, senior Java developer, director of developers. The skill differences between those grades start to talk about the same type of expectations we have really Agile aligned team members that are growing in their influence and their ability to help change an organization. It starts talking about collaboration. It starts talking about mentorship. It starts talking about taking on broader roles for building up your peers and creating communities of excellence and those types of non-positional authority skills that we want to have. I think the difficulty that comes is there's a natural assertion that at a certain point, career growth and responsibility and authority are commingled. And that if we can separate those two and have it be a career progression of skill-based career goals versus now you're at the point where you have authority over people to make decisions, Well, that's a different thing, and that's part of some of that deep de-laddering, some of that flattening of the organization is recognizing that there's a difference between the authority that we're now pushing down to our teams and the skills and responsibilities for growth and mentorship and community building that we expect of our really high performing employees.
Right. Braz, I'm going to suggest we touch on a question that Shirley posed in the chat as opposed to
Sure.
the Q&A. She asked, I think really hitting on the same topic, Scrum roles are a work function, not titles. And is that the way you read that, Braz?
That is how I read that, yeah.
Okay.
And Shirley, if we're wrong, feel free to drop something in the Q&A as a follow-up.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So, you know, a servant leader in IT may still be a development manager, according to HR. And you're right. That's absolutely correct. I've worked as an Agile coach and been called a project manager. I've been a product owner and called a program manager in terms of HR titles. We really try to coach people to let the HR titles exist in a little bit of a different space than the Scrum roles. You may be called and paid and promoted on an HR track that is not particularly indicative of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis on your Scrum team. But that initial hesitation it exists all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a dev manager. It's like, well, sure, that's what you're paid as. That's fantastic. Your role on this team, however, is whatever it is.
Right, and I think it's interesting too. Surely that you say a servant leader in IT may still be a development manager. Frankly, I would love to see more managers be servant leaders. That is a hard transition to make again. Is that idea that I have gone from being that command and control for all the connotations that has expert to really working in service of the team. And we talk about the triangle of authority with the folks actually doing the work down the bottom and the authority moving up the triangle, and that Agile turns it upside down so that the authority now belongs to the people doing the work, and the management structures, as light as they are underneath it, support that decision making. That's servant leadership, and I'd love to see more servant leaders as managers. Brian's got a great point that if HR needs certain things because they haven't been included yet, I think Dalen brings up a great point in the questions that we really do need to include HR as soon as possible when we start thinking about adopting an Agile mindset, adopting Agile principles and practices, because our traditional roles and the shape of our organization, the culture we're introducing, is going to start changing. Things going on with our team is going to create clashes. It's going to create uncomfortable transitions for people, for teams, for your whole organization. So you're spot on, Dalen, that we do need to include HR as early as possible, at least to help them understand and help with the transition.
So if I could add one thing to Dalen's question.
You may not. That was
Okay.
Dalen's question. It's not your question.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. Go ahead.
So the conflict between what Scrum is asking of people to do, particularly on a dev team, to collaborate and mentor and bring up the skill levels of everybody involved, really can be in conflict with a performance review process that may really focus in on individual achievement and accomplishment. And my advice is usually to make that collaboration and mentorship a specific measured item on performance reviews.
Right.
So you're a senior developer and you are trying to reach that next ladder rung, which we're calling technical lead. Fantastic. To become a technical lead on a collaborative team, you need to demonstrate these skills around collaboration and mentoring junior members of the team, ensuring knowledge transfer when we have team member changes, all of that good stuff. Make it a discussion point on the performance reviews. But initially, wow, we see that all the time, that you'll have a superhero centric performance evaluation, and hey, developers are smart, quantitative, bright people. And if you're going to pay me and promote me based on X and you're asking me to do Y, well, I'm going to do X. That's where my bread's
That's
buttered.
human nature. That's right.
Yep.
So we've got 4 minutes left. We got 2 questions, and Sunda's
Okay.
had a question very early on that we've been ignoring. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on Sunda's question. It's a great, raison d'etre for specific roles. Look at me going French there for a second. Do we still need a technical or development lead when we have a Scrum Master? Sunda, yeah, I think you do. And this goes back to the conversation point we had a little bit earlier around the Scrum Master, I would say shouldn't, but definitely doesn't have to be that technical expert. They are someone there whose job it is to take a step back and notice when the team is struggling and ask some really powerful questions to help them get unstuck and move forward. But they're not going to be there to be the one who is that technical expert. You still need folks there who are deep technical and deep business experts, deep process experts in a lot of cases to help navigate through larger organizations to be part of the team. And your Scrum Master steps back from that to make sure everything's working in concert as smoothly as possible. And the impediments that come up that make things difficult get resolved as quickly as possible.
So Braz,
go ahead, Brian.
you and I have been talking for an hour and we haven't picked a fight. So let's not let it end without one.
Oh,
so are you saying that you want all the Scrum teams to have a technical or dev lead?
No, I don't think they would have. I don't think all teams need to have one. I think high performing teams, you have everybody on the team assume that role at some sliver of my expertise in this level. Are we not fighting? Oh,
no,
man,
I thought we had a good one going. Okay.
I thought we did too.
Yeah, that's a disappointment.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we have one question left. What do you say?
2 whole minutes.
In 2 whole minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Should the role okay.
No.
Should the role definitions be shown within the Scrum team's working agreements as a reminder, information radiator? Role definitions. I have to admit, I have not done that. Have you?
I haven't either. But I understand where you're asking that question, anonymous attendee. I don't think that there's a problem with that. I would question outside of the 3 big roles, Scrum Master, product owner, team member. I think where some of the uncomfortableness comes is I'm a team member, but I'm a deep expert on DB or Oracle or SQL, or I'm a deep expert on Java or .NET. And that's where my expertise is. And I have that technical silo and those blinders that this is all I do. And it loses that opportunity to collaborate. And you may have heard mob programming or something like that, swarming as a team to solve problems. So if you display your role definitions, and I'm a huge fan of transparency, I'm a huge fan of BVIRs, big visible information radiators. Absolutely. Here are the 3 roles that we believe on this team are important. And if you're not one of those 3 roles, are you part of the team? Mm-hmm. And if you don't feel that your role is captured here, let's have that conversation about it. But let's not invent new roles underneath there, and let's not create silos.
Right.
What we really want to do is create collaboration among everybody on the team.
But for Miss or Ms. Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous attendee, I think for beginning teams, displaying to remind folks about the role definitions could be valuable. It's a great idea. It's frankly not one I've ever done, but I'm curious now, especially if there's confusion about what a particular person's role within a particular context might be. I think clarifying might be helpful.
That's good.
I think we're out of time, Braz.
I think we are too.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Braz, and thanks everyone for attending today.
Great. Thanks so much.